Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, whenever you happen to see this. It's been a couple weeks since I made a video. As most of you know, that means that I've been working. Been pretty good. This work's been fairly easy, and it's allowed me to do a little bit more reading than I have normally. Um, I kind of suspected that I might, so I came prepared. Let's look here. These are the books that I've read already since I've been here. Got the History of the U.S. Army, The Blank Slate, Whiskey Rebellion, Marxism by Thomas Sowell, War Before Civilization, The Myth of the Robber Barons, and The Neanderthals Undiscovered. I'm currently reading History of the Ancient Near East, and then this is what I have left: Ancient Egypt, Creating a Class, Kibbutzim, and the Decline and Fall of the Sasanian Empire. So, as you can see, it's quite a mix. I like to kind of switch between topics, even though I'll stay with a certain topic. I like to interpose it with other topics, usually, not all the time. So, yeah, and these are most of these books are ones that I've had for a while. The History of the United States Army is actually one that I got in relation to what's going to be my study of the Civil War. As I mentioned, I think I bought about 40 books on that topic based off of the book Emancipating Slaves, Enslaving Freemen. Most of those books had not arrived by the time that I left. Um, I think I've kind of realized that I needed to study U.S. history a lot more. Been so focused on things like World War II and the Civil War, that kind of just covering the 19th century more broadly was something that I really needed to do. And that book, because of its amazing bibliography, really gives you a chance to do that because you can study things in depth like slavery or the Jacksonian democracy or monetary policy or the Second Bank of the United States or any number of the presidencies. I think I ended up buying several autobiographical books that cover not just the president's personal life, like who they married and what they believed in, but their political ideology, the political battles that kind of framed their career, that sort of thing. And I think that's going to be a really fruitful kind of reading list. And most of those books, and of course, also will contribute to understanding the Civil War. I think I've got a decent grasp of it, but the more the better. So this is kind of a mix, and some of those books were pretty good, and some of those books were only okay. The Myth of the Robber Barons is kind of got to be the poor child out of that selection. Um, there's some good things in there, but ultimately I didn't can take very much from it, and I was kind of title's misleading because it makes it sound like he's going to prove there's no such thing as robber barons. And all he does instead is he gives you basically 20-page biographies of several very prominent, industrialists, which itself is good. It's nice to learn some of the details, say about John D. Rockefeller, Charles Schwab, or Vanderbilt. Some of these characters I knew a lot about. Some of them I knew almost nothing. There is useful information in there for sure. He doesn't give a systematic argument as to how there couldn't be. He talks about the distinction between political entrepreneurs and free market entrepreneurs or market entrepreneurs, but then he doesn't provide any systematic case as to why one's better than the other one, what there was more of, that sort of thing, which I think is the main point. But it's still good to just kind of learn about some of these people a little bit. Um, all the other ones were good. The Soul book on Marxism was good, helped me a lot in my understanding of Marxism. It won't be the last book I read on the topic. Um, the history of the Civil War or of the U.S. Army was actually very interesting. There's a lot of stuff in there about volunteer armies, militias, um, yeah, a lot of stuff in there a lot of stuff about the efficacy of standing armies, especially in the context of the United States. Not from a libertarian perspective, but just from a broader historical perspective. I'm going to read a couple more books about that, I think, actually. Um, and yeah, the one I'm reading now, The Early History of the Ancient Near East, it was written in 1988, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I think is dated. When he lists important sites, he gives a map, and places like Göbekli Tepe are not on there because I guess they just weren't well understood at this point. I know that it had been excavated by then, but he never mentions it, and it's not listed on a comprehensive. What he lists as a comprehensive site. So I think there's a lot of good information in there. I am learning things, but it's less than I thought. But Um, sorry, that 5-minute intro of what I've been up to, so probably not good. But so this is going to be a video. It kind of has been prompted by a couple things, a couple posts that I've seen, some stuff relating to Bernie Sanders, some of the stuff I read in Pinker's book, and that is about wealth redistribution, income redistribution. This is like a perennial issue, and there's this impulse that's more or less powerful and more or less pronounced of we need to take money from wealthy people and give it to poor people. And I think in a certain way it's sort of natural for people to have that impulse, at least some people. But I think that it's motivated by very disingenuous, not disingenuous, but disastrous emotions like envy, and I just wanted to talk about it a little bit, I guess, not to be too eloquent about it, but the idea that like poverty is something that hierarchy, people want status, right? People are evolved to distinguish themselves from their peers, mostly to aid in sexual selection. For males, the primary goal is to select, to be selected by females for reproduction. Males want to demonstrate that they have good genes, they have good qualities, that they would have successful offspring. And secondarily, that they would be good providers. The main thing is to have good offspring. The secondary thing is to be able to then rear those offspring or help rear them. And this manifests in all kinds of things. And this manifests in like physical, how do you look, how good shape you are, how virile you are, how athletic, how dexterous. You know, there's a lot of things. It's not, but it's not just your. And it's funny too, because even though like gay people don't want to like reproduce necessarily, I mean, gay people do have sex and have babies and whatever. There's plenty of people in monogamous relationships who are married who are on Grindr looking for gay gratification. But even gay guys, you can tell they're looking for bodies and athletic shapes that are not always, but generally, you know, that they're looking for the same traits of health. But you know, humans are a social species, and there's more than one way to have useful genes. It's not just your physicality. You know, if you have really good skills in terms of negotiating people, broadly speaking, political skills, if you're good at talking, if you're somebody that other people listen to, or that you're always the life of the party, or you have good ability to navigate a social environment, those are actually extremely useful. In fact, in the long run, they may be more useful. I mean, it's almost a truism, certainly cliche, that you know society isn't run by the most athletic people. You know, we don't have and I don't just mean the presidency, but in the captains of industry are not the strongest people. The strongest people in the world, in the country, are not the most powerful, and aren't necessarily the most likely to reproduce in that sense. So there's lots of traits that women select for, and it's you know, the evolutionary desires to select for women, or to appeal to female selection. And status is one of those things. If you are within the hierarchy of your social circles relatively high, that's something that women are going to find attracted to, and they're going to select for. You know, if you are low on the social ladder in a desperate environment, the chances that you fall through the cracks in terms of resource allocation, that your well-being is undermined or less certain because you're not able to cope very well with other people or deal with other people. That's not good. Now, even if the scenario right now is, well, first, these preferences are going to be based on our genes, and right now, until we have gene therapy or cybernetic technology that gets us past this, which may be right around the corner, but it's not here now, that's how people are making their decisions. But more than that, let's say you could say, well, there's no chance that we're going to be in a starvation situation right now, so why does it matter? Well, it still could matter because it's about your kids, right? And you don't want to have kids like, okay, well, they're going to do fine as long as nothing goes wrong. But like if I have babies through Johnny Loser, You know, those kids, they're going to take my genes, they're going to be wedded to Johnny Loser, and you know, in 4 years, when there's a horrible depression or some kind of asteroid Armageddon or whatever, they're not going to do as well as if I had married, um, you know, Johnny Jock or whoever, somebody who has better genes in that regard. So, you know, status, the hunt for status is natural. People do it everywhere, and people also like have envy towards it. They look at people who have high status, and they want to get some of it for themselves. But what the egalitarians don't understand, and what the wealth redistributionists, wealth redistributionists, distributists, the wealth redistributists, sorry, uh, don't understand is that even if you have income equality, you still have status and hierarchy, right? So if we go to like a beach and you see you've got people on there who are really fat, who are really out of shape, who are have gout, who are foolish or stupid, and then you have other people who are in good shape, or maybe the life of the party, or the person that everyone is trying to interact with. You see people make circles around or gravitate towards certain people or drawn to certain people. And then you just look at any. It doesn't have to be at the beach. It could be at a party. It could be in a workplace. Anywhere. It could be at a fucking left-wing rally. You're gonna see this. And if we were to come and wave a wand and say, let's just imagine all those people have the same income, it wouldn't matter. You'd still have the hierarchy. You would still have people with more social status. You'd still have people that others are envious and covetous of. You know, if you go to the gym and you're fat, and I keep using that as an example, but it's just the most outwardly evident one. It's not the only one that matters, and it's not one that can't be overcome through like other means. If you're fat, but you're also like very wealthy or very powerful or have great social skills, then you can compensate for that. So I'm just using that as one example. But you've got other people who are in great shape, you know, ripped, low body fat counts, lots of athletic ability, and then you say, well, they have the same income, they have the same wealth, so everything's fine, right? No, I mean, you're still going to have an asymmetry in status, and evening out their income isn't going to change that. And so I think that that's a really important thing to realize, is that even if these attempts were successful, they wouldn't alleviate the problem. The egalitarianism, as Rothbard said, is a revolt against nature. You're still going to have differences in people, and those differences are still going to cause acrimony, even if you could, and there's a good question of whether you could actually redistribute wealth. And you know, a lot of people say, we'll respond to this as like, this is all silly, you know, this is all evolutionary psychobabble, and it's not about status, and it's not about, you know, how you fare and like sexual selection. That's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about trying to help people and trying to get them what they need, and trying to get, you know, to subsidize them in a way that's going to help them out with material goods. Well, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. That's not the motivating factor behind it. Because if it was, pointing out income inequality, or, you know, unfair concentrations of wealth or disparities in wealth would be irrelevant. Okay, if you're just talking about material well-being, then differences in income are irrelevant. If somebody is eating well, if they have all their dietary needs met, and indeed in our case usually far exceeded, and for shelter and whatnot, then it does. Then there's no welfare basis then to say, oh, but there are other people who are, you know, 100,000 times more wealthy than they are. So what? If it's only about having enough resources for them to survive and to reproduce and to have lives, then it doesn't matter if somebody else has 1,000,000 times or 1,000,000,000 times or 1,000,000,000,000 times their wealth. That's an irrelevant variable in that situation. But it's interesting because there's such a high emphasis on the disparity, on that there's a big difference. Again, there's always going to be a difference, even if we flattened incomes to everything, say, oh, everyone's the same. We're still going to have envious people. We're still going to have people who in social circles have more say. You know, they say, oh, all this wealth creates influence. Well, wealth can create influence, but it's not the only thing that creates influence. Noam Chomsky is not the richest man in the world, but he has a lot of influence. And I always use him because, and this is almost like respect for him in a certain way, even though I disagree with him on so much, that he has enormous influence among the left. I mean, they listen to what he says, and they will, you know, and it depends on which type of the left you're talking about, obviously, but they're going to, you know, you could say this about Marx were he alive, like they're just going to say, they're going to defer to his opinion. They're going to have an opinion based on him. And like you could say, even though he doesn't have a lot of money, and Marx was extremely good at squandering money, I don't know how much money Chomsky has based on the number of books and how popular that they are, and the fact that he has a cushy, well-paying job anyway. I would imagine that he's pretty well off, although I wouldn't hazard to guess to say how much. They still have an asymmetry in influence. They still have more uh, sway within society than somebody else, and it's rather indeterminate about their income. Uh, and that's the other thing. Um, even if you took what I said about status as true, you could say, well, see, like there's more than one type of status, right? You don't have to have. It doesn't have to be an income, right? Like in certain circles, Noam Chomsky is going to have more status than Bill Gates, all right? Or LeBron James is going to have more status than Bill Gates, even though Bill Gates has vastly more money than either of those two people, all right? It's actually fascinating. You can become, and this is actually like addressing the real issue here. It's not about income, right? A difference in an income is not going to, maybe there's some correlation, but not really. You can achieve greatness or at least outstandingness, maybe not become the best, but become far better than most of your peers. You can achieve status in just about anything. You know, you can be the best cook at your church. You may not be the best cook in the world, but you can become the best cook of all the people who go to your potlucks. You can become the best horseshoe player at all the people who you play horseshoes with, or the best bowler. You can become in really good shape to the point where you make most of the people around you look bad, even if you probably would never ever be able to compete or win like a Mr. Universe competition. All right, you can do well financially even if you don't become super wealthy. You can be more wealthy than your neighbors. You don't have to beat Bill Gates. It doesn't have to be Horatio Alger. You're so rich that everyone is astonished. You don't have to become Andrew Mellon or Andrew Carnegie or Charles Schwab or any of the people that he listed in his book. You just have to be richer than some of the people around you, or better than them in some other way. And to facilitate that kind of social advancement, what you need is the most personal autonomy possible, so long as you're not infringing on the personal autonomy of other people. Basically, laissez-faire, negative rights, legal order. That's what you need. To restrict that autonomy and say, well, there's certain things you can't do, or that there's large barriers to entry, then you're actually retarding that potentiality from existing. You know, the regulations. I mean, and that's not to say everyone's going to become an entrepreneur in various industries or whatever, although that should be an option people have. But by restricting what's really available and by raising the cost of living, I mean, we don't have a capitation tax, but we have property taxes, which are essentially the same thing when it comes down to it. You can, other than you can make them fairly divisible by sharing your space with somebody, like subleasing or whatever, or squatting illegally, but then your standard of living is going to be pretty low if you have to do that. What you need to do to survive is pretty restricted. You can't become a subsistence farmer. You can't be like it's essentially illegal. You have to pay taxes in money, not in kind. This is where I have a certain degree of respect for like the whole wage labor thing. Like you are forced to have money, not by corporations necessarily. They're not going to bother you. I mean, they're not going to give you stuff for free, but they're not going to come and throw you in jail if you don't do business with them. The government will, and the government insists that the business be done not in kind, but in money. So you can't, pay them with ears of corn or sculptures or whatever. They want money, and that's going to force you to have a job essentially, or do something that generates income, which is highly beneficial. I mean, you have more options that way than if you were to just barter or produce everything yourself, which is frankly almost impossible beyond a Stone Age level. But I think you should be able to have that option. But that's what's going to allow you to do. To flourish, you need to have options, and you need to be able to develop those options. And to have them blocked off is not going to help you. To have everybody channeled, well, you got to go to school, and then you got to go to college, and then you got to get a job. Well, you can still prosper doing that, and plenty of people do. But it's certainly fewer options than if it wasn't stratified like that. So, you know, the people who are begging for more money, who like, even if they got what they wanted, even if we had the wealth redistribution, it's not going to give you the status that you want. You're still going to be ugly. You're still going to be a loser. You're still going to be a nobody, even if you have the same amount of money as somebody else, which is, I think, you know, not really practically ever going to happen. There's a couple other problems with the whole idea. One is the conflation of taking from the rich and giving to the poor with being taxed by the government. Money that is sent to the government doesn't mean that it's going to the poor. Most of the money that goes to the government stays with the government. It pays government employees who are upper middle class bureaucrats who have cushy generous pensions and cushy jobs by and large. It goes to their office buildings, to their janitorial staff, to their bonuses. It goes to technocrats with PhDs to go and do studies about this or that, studies that nobody reads, that really don't advance knowledge anymore, and are mostly there to perpetuate the idea that we need whatever agency commissioned the study. You know, and what does actually go to quote unquote the poor is A, it goes through a sieve, so there isn't as much, and B, it's spent in a way that is often very morally hazardous. You know, and that's the other thing, is like, wealth, it requires you to act in a certain way and to have a certain ratio of consumption and production and income. You know, and if you go to somebody who has bad habits, and they're not bad in the absolute ethical sense, but they're bad in if one of your this is what the interesting things, like with science and economics, they can't tell you what you ought to do, like blank slate ought to do. They can tell you if your goals are X, then you should do Y. That's what they're good for. So if your goals are to be, like, I don't know, either be wealthy or have a fairly high standard of living or whatever it is, and not to be destitute, then you need to produce or have more income than you consume. It's just that simple. And you'll probably have to do other things too, like invest it or whatever. But that's the bare minimum of what you need to do. And just giving somebody a whole bunch of money because they're not producing anything, they're just going to consume it. I mean, and how it's based on how much they consume and how much you give them, but they will eventually consume all of it. And he actually, I guess it was too hard on the film Robber Barons, because he does actually talk about the sons of successful men and how the majority of them just end up consuming their entire lives, and most of those fortunes are gone or severely depleted. They get divided up among 4 or 5 sons who don't have the same experience as their fathers, who maybe worked up from nothing. Most of them did, by the way. Most of the really wealthy ones started, maybe they weren't necessarily destitutely poor, but weren't fabulously wealthy either. But their sons don't grow up to be that way. At least most of them. Not a couple of them do. A couple of them go to good schools and make good friends, and they learn from the business, and they have, you know, a good experience in that way. And yeah, they have a foot ahead. They have it easier than somebody who's starting from nothing. But most of those kids, they just they consume all of it. And if you just give money to poor people, most of them are just going to consume all of it. And right now, actually, the way the welfare system is set up is they get penalized if they save. And so all this is to say that one of the reasons people are poor, one of the main reasons they're poor, I mean, there's the worthy poor. There are people who are like incapacitated for either mental or physical reasons, and they can't work. And obviously, what I'm saying here is not applicable to them. If you're talking to somebody who is a vegetable or who is, you know, debilitated to the point where they can't do anything, these arguments don't really apply. If you're talking about the working poor, which is the vast majority, and when you hear that there's 30% poverty or whatever, 15% or 19% poverty, that's not 19% people who are bedridden, who can't get out of bed, who can't move, who are on death's door. That's mostly that those people exist, but it's mostly the working poor, people who can work, who can do something, and most of those people, though, not all of them, but most of those people have really terrible habits when it comes to this. And there's actually probably a good evolutionary explanation for a lot of this behavior. But basically, a lot of poor people have a hard time not consuming whatever income they have right away. And I've witnessed this so many times. Um, I've worked low-income jobs for many years, longer than I've worked in this job before. Even in this job, I've seen it. Like, I mean, I used to work at a telemarketing place where we'd solicit donations for charities that were real, but 95% of the money went to the charity, to us, and 5. It was a horrible job. I hated it. Right. Most of the people who work there, I would describe as white trash. Right. Low income. They're from low income, and they don't have any kind of real aspirations. They take welfare when they can. Well, let me finish this thought first. Every payday was like party day. We got paid on Friday. And even though at the time, I'm supporting myself, I've got student loans I have to pay off. I was done with college when I was in this job. But, I was getting paid and it was not very much. We're looking at like $150 a week, something like that. Not a lot of money. Every week. So you figure it's like $300 every 2 weeks. It seems like a lot of low-income places are paid every 2 weeks. It was like 150, 200 a week. Not very much. And I would go and I would put that money in the bank. And I might go, if I didn't have any outstanding bills to pay, and if I did, I would obviously pay those bills. I might go and buy like 1 ounce of silver. And this is back when silver is like $11, $10 an ounce. And I might splurge and buy a pizza for $5 or $6. And that was what I would do with my money. And by the end of the next week, probably like half of it would be gone, mostly because I had to make student loan payments, cell phone bills, whatever else, credit cards. Yeah, I had credit cards back then still. And that's how it. Most of the people in that office, as soon as work ended Friday, most of them didn't have bank accounts, so they'd go cash out at whatever grocery store or whatever, and then they go to the liquor store and they would buy as much booze as they could, as much cigarettes as they could, as many drugs as they could if that's what they were into. So like Friday night and Saturday was like feast, right? They're easy to give their money away to their friends. I mean, they're spotting each other 20s and 30s that whole day. By Sunday night, they're bumming money off people because all their money's gone. They spent it all, and it's not because of some horrible fucking they have terrible medical bills because they're a single mom and their baby has meningitis and she has to pay drugs. I mean, yes, does that happen? Sure. Never happened when I was there. It never happened to any of those people. They just went and they fucking drank all of it. All right. They literally drank or smoked almost all of it every week. And giving those people more money is not going to help. It's just going to mean they're going to party hard for a little bit longer, and that's it. Now, government welfare is not addressing that at all. In fact, government welfare will a lot of time tells these people you have to have a bad job. You can't get a higher income. I think I've related the anecdote before. When I worked at Burger King before this time, there was a woman there who she got a housing subsidy. It was a really good housing subsidy in the sense that she had to pay like $1 a month, and then the city would pay off the rest. And it wasn't even in government housing. I think there were rules on how much she couldn't go and rent a $1 million place a month or whatever, but within a certain range she could. And a couple times Burger King offered her promotions to become, say, like a manager, and she flatly refused because if her income went up even that relatively small amount, she would lose the subsidy. And in the short run, that made sense to her because she's not going to, like, the difference, the $2 extra per hour is not going to cover the housing subsidy. And so she thought she was being really clever, playing the system, because we used to talk about welfare, and I was like, that's, whatever, taxes, your parasite, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, joke's on you. Joke's totally on you. I get this, basically free house to live in, and I pocket the rest of that money, obviously. Money's fungible, bitch. So she can use that extra money for what, I don't know what she's spending. I don't know if she was, I'm sure she drank. I don't know if she was, like, drinking all of it or whatever. But what ended up happening, of course, is I moved on. I got better jobs. I worked my ass off. And I make like 5, 10, I don't know, times more money than I did with her 5 years ago. and she still works there because I don't live in that area anymore. But whenever I go back, I'll stop there. She's still there. She's still there making whatever the minimum wage. Oh, they wanted up $1. Okay, yeah, she makes $8 an hour. Fuck, boo hoo hoo. Like it. Like you tell me. I mean, they say social safety net. I say it's a social snare. It keeps you down. It incentivizes you to keep down. Now, there are people who use it to good effect, and they have done research to this effect. They have people who will use government programs as a springboard to do better. But the thing about those people is that if the government programs weren't there, they would still find something. Whatever opportunity came their way, they would use it. And so now, when those opportunities come along varies quite a bit, and it depends on how outgoing this person is, and of course, their social skills and their work skills or whatever. But like, they'll if it hadn't been some government welfare check that gave them much opportunity, it would have been something else. A job opening, a friend who says, "Hey, we're looking for work," or whatever, and they would have gone ahead anyway, most likely. For other people, it's basically telling them you need to be poor and you need to stay here. And I don't see what the point of like having wealth redistribution is. That's all we're subsidizing, and that's essentially what's happening. And the evolutionary reason for this probably, I think, is that historically, as hunter-gatherer species, you didn't save really. I mean, a little bit, but if you kill an animal, you can't, before refrigeration and freezers and stuff, you can't, or salting, you can't, oh, I'm going to keep some of this mammoth for like a couple months from now. You can't. It's all perishable, so you got to eat it all right away. I think Pinker talks about that a little bit in his book. You can't walk away from a load of sugar. I mean, it's given us problems for our weight because now that there's this abundance of calories and sugars and salts and all these things that we've been programmed, like, hey, that's fucking important. Like, that tastes good. I want that. Because of free market capitalism, we have so much of that now that you actually have to you have to restrain yourself. Most people, I mean, some people have high enough metabolisms with the right lifestyles that they can kind of glide through this. But for those people, as you get older, it's not going to keep going that way, pretty much guaranteed. Yeah, I mean, these evolutionary incentives are to just gorge ourselves on those things. And likewise, these guys I'm working with, or I have been working with, they got, a paycheck, and it was very hard for them not to go and spend all of it right away, And at that time, when I get paid $150 seemed like a lot of money to me. Like I would almost never ever spend $150 on something, unless I was making a major purchase, which I wouldn't do hardly ever, right? But I wouldn't go and like go to Walmart and be like, oh, look at that DVD player. It's $100. I could definitely afford that because I got paid $150 today. No, I didn't. I would save it, but that was hard. That deferred consumption was difficult psychologically. Now I've inured myself to it. Like I got used to just living on a lot less for such a long time that I trained myself, and I don't know why. Like the cliche is that gay guys have higher time preference and blow all their money, which is kind of interesting too, because I've had some people be like, well, you have all this money, and I'm not like rich, but I do well. Like I'm like, well, it's because you're gay and you don't have kids or whatever. And then other people are like, no, gay people waste all their money. I'm like, okay, like make up. Can't win. Like I either should be extravagantly a spendthrift with my money, or I should be in economic heaven because I don't have kids, or a girlfriend that I have to waste it all on, whatever. But yeah, like the impulse is then just to take all that. But like everything I've ever read and ever heard people who have achieved wealth have said is like you can't do that. You have to save more than you can consume, and then you have to invest it, or you have to become an entrepreneur who can develop a skill and a service and a good that is competitive on the market, which is very difficult to do, but it is possible. But even then, you have to defer consumption. You can't like your first day take all the money that you make at your lemonade stand or your floor sanding business or whatever it is, and then just go and have a great party. You're never going to have a successful business doing that ever. I mean, it's extremely unlikely. It's unlikely even if you do everything right. If you do all that stuff wrong, the odds decline astronomically, I would say. So, this redistributionist attitude, in a sense, it might be addressing some of the symptoms, but it's not addressing the cause, and so it's never going to end the problem. In fact, by subsidizing it, it is encouraging the problem. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Like, and it's not even going to achieve like anything. Like even if we assume income equality, and we can go to places, we can anthropologists and can go and look at like societies that they don't have money, they don't have hardly any wealth, but there's still disparities. Like you still have people who have more sexual selection with more status, who are people who treat more deferentially, who they respect more. And one thing that's never going to earn you respect is being the recipient of welfare. That's never going to make people go, oh, look at them. They fucking took tons of money in tax money because, like, no, no, that just makes you a loser. Most people look at that and like, no, that makes you pathetic. Like, it makes you like a child, like a baby who can't take care of themselves. That's what it looks like to most people because that's how you're acting. You're acting like a dependent person who can't contribute to. People talk about, antisocial libertarians. But contributing to society means you pay your own way and you produce a surplus for other people. You produce something that other people value enough that they'll, pay you or at least pay attention to you and listen to you. And just receiving money uh, doesn't qualify as that. So yeah, and I think it is true. Like it's definitely based on it because if it wasn't, wealth inequality would be irrelevant. It would be, oh, who cares if a poor person has less money than a rich person? If they have certain needs met, it's irrelevant, right? The only reason to talk about disparities in wealth, which is all I ever hear, is because of envy, because of jealousy, and it's a the joke is on them because even if they got what they wanted, it wouldn't make us all equal and egalitarian. Which is, by the way, boring. I mean, who would want everyone to be equal? That would suck. Like, yes, I mean, there are different ways you can use the term equal, like in terms of justice or philosophically equal, or in the eyes of the law. They're extremely powerful utilitarian, if not deontological, reasons to favor that type of equality. The equality of ends or of results, no, there's no reason. Like, there's every utilitarian reason to oppose that for the incentive reason and for no other. Um, and it won't help. It won't make people whole. You aren't going to be a satisfied, flourishing human being because no one else has more money than you. You're going to, in practical sense, because of the programs that they're talking about would be enormously destructive to wealth. You're going to be on net far poorer than you would be otherwise, and you're still not going to be equal because there's still going to be different. There's differentiation between you and others, largely based on genes, also largely based on nurture. Both of these, it doesn't matter what the ratio is, it's still going to be there. And looking for your salvation in that process and a wealth redistributive, a forceful government redistribution of wealth. I mean, you could say like entrepreneurship is a redistribution of wealth. You're giving people value, they're giving you more value back. Boom, that's redistribution, sure. But if you're talking about like coercive, unilateral redistribution, and the other, like there's other things too, like the institution that's doing the redistribution, they're going to have de facto more money and more power than anybody else. So you're not going to get egalitarianism that way. You create an institution that has vastly more social sway than anybody else, and they're going to have individuals who are vastly more. And just because there's some voting that happens at some level of this doesn't mean that everyone has equal control or that everyone's equal or that there's equal decision making. You still have representatives, you still technocrats and bureaucrats who are going to exercise qualitatively greater amounts of power and control, and their social standing is going to reflect that. And again, even if we did get the income equality, there's still going to be differences. You're not going to feel better about yourself. You're still going to be a loser. You're still going to be ugly. You're still going to be somebody that nobody wants to talk to, that nobody is interested in hanging around or gravitating towards. And when you see people who do still have that, even if you guys have the same income, you're still going to feel fucking jealous and ashamed of yourself. So just go ahead and not take the money, please. So that's it.